and you can take over.
Okay, well, thank you, George. And so just to give you a little background, I've been out here since 1971. And best thing in my mind. But what I have found is that I can change my mind, and we all can, and it's a wonderful thing. So the talk tonight, I am going to try to bring in wisdom from Western traditions as well as some from the Buddhist tradition. The bottom line is that the source of wisdom is our own mind. It's within. And Buddhists don't own wisdom. Nobody owns wisdom. That it arises in all cultures throughout history. So this is why I'm going to be using a variety of different sources, but primarily from the West. And the point being is that we can use difficult times and difficulties in our life to become more resilient. And I define resilient as being able to bounce back to where you were. But on the other hand, we can do better than that. We can bounce forward. We can grow, we can learn, we can develop wisdom, we can develop our character. There's a phrase that's relatively new in psychology, which is called post-traumatic growth. And that's what this is talking about. So I'm going to start here with a quote from Charles Dickens, that this is the beginning words of his book, Tale of Two Cities. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that this was about uncertain times. You had the French Revolution and people were being beheaded right and left. And so the book starts in 1775 in London and Paris, but he wrote the book in 1859. And at the end of this quote, he refers to like the present period. And so that referred to the mid-19th century. And so why I'm bringing this up is that it reminds me of today, right now, here in the United States. So here's the quote. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, this period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on it being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. So, there are a number of points here. First of all, this isn't the first stressful time that even this country has faced. And when you go back throughout history, there are lots of times in history, in different cultures, in different places, and so forth, where it looked just as bleak, if not much bleaker. So we're not unique. And it's good to avoid thinking that somehow or another, this is the worst thing that could possibly happen to us, and there's nothing that could be worse. Another point is to avoid superlatives. Avoid talking like this is absolutely the worst thing that could happen, or something else being, this would be the best thing that could happen, that it's good to have equanimity when we face difficulties in life. It's good to have equanimity when we face really good circumstances in life. And so we maintain our balance, our emotional balance, and maintain a calm mind. So the next point that I want to make is that if we're going to use this to grow, to flourish, to bounce forward, we need to take responsibility. And so using life's manure is about nourishing what we want to grow. It starts with taking responsibility for our responses to what we meet in life. We can't control what we meet in life, but we can take responsibility on how we respond to it, both with our bodily movements and what we say with our voice, and what goes on in our minds, our emotional responses. Taking responsibility for our actions of body, speech, and mind empower us. So now I'm going to go to Viktor Frankl, who was a prison in a number of different Nazi death camps in World War II, and he survived. And he happened to have been a psychiatrist before he went in, and he used his experience in the death camps in his practice afterwards. And he wrote a number of books. The one that has been read the most and translated in the most languages and sold the most copies is Man's Search for Meaning. So here are some quotes from him. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So again, one of the reasons why I bring him up is for us again to get a little more perspective about the situation we are in. In his Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about being with a large group of prisoners, and they're all stripped absolutely naked, that there they are in the camp with the Nazi guards and so forth, and they are just totally naked. They have nothing. But as he said, the power to choose our response. So the next one is, I grasped the meaning of the greatest secret that all human poetry and human thought and belief have to impart. The salvation of man is through love and in love. It was that kept him going in the camps. He talks about in the book that he knew his wife had been executed and was dead, but he just kept thinking about her and the love that the two of them had between them. And while others would give in to the despair to the point where they would quit eating or run towards the perimeter fence where they knew they would be shot, suicide by guard, he didn't do that. He may experience despair, but he knew how to get out of despair. And it was through using love. So to bring this up to the present, now you remember Michael Cohen was Trump's lawyer, and he was sentenced to federal prison because things that he did for Trump. And this is part of his statement at the sentencing hearing, the statement to the judge. Quote, I stand before your honor humbly and painfully aware that we are here today for one reason, because of my actions that I pled guilty to on August 21st, as well as on November 29th. I take full responsibility for each act that I pled guilty to, the personal ones to me and those involving the President of the United States of America. Viktor Frankl, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, wrote, quote, "There are forces beyond your control that can take away everything you possess except for one thing, your freedom to choose how you will respond to the situation." Your Honor, this may seem hard to believe, but today is one of the most meaningful days of my life. This is how you can grow and use the manure of our experience for growth. I will say too that one thing that impressed me about Viktor Frankl's book is he never wrote anything in anger about the Nazis. What he said was more matter of fact. This is what they did. This is what I experienced. This is how I felt, and so on and so forth. And it's really a very moving book to read, and it is because of that reason. So now going on to spiritual growth. What is spiritual growth? It means, grow means to change. The seed never sees the flower. Growth means letting go of the security of being where you are now. It means leaving home. This is how we develop character. And here are some, what I would say, traits or qualities of character: honesty, integrity, sincerity, wisdom, compassion, patience, mental stability, tolerance, and love. So where I'm going to turn now is a poem by Rudyard Kipling. And he wrote this originally to his son. And the very last verse mentions his son. The poem is called If. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up with worn out tools, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginning and never breathe a word about your loss, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on where there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Now, I would prefer to end that with, and which is more, you will have character. Now, this is actually holds a lot of Buddhist values. I posted this poem a couple of days ago on my Facebook page, and I got a like by Lama Karma. I don't know if any of you have met him, but he's come out to my center here in the Ridgeland area at least 4 times and given programs, weekend program, Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. So that's an idea right there. And he was trained traditionally in Tibet before he finally ended up here in this country. I think he spent time in India as well, from Tibet to India to here. So to go on, if we are going to have character, a lot of the qualities that are described in that poem are important. Now, the next one here is if we are going to cultivate the garden of our mind and grow flowers, we need how to work with ourselves. This is an inner path, going inward. So to kind of sum up that part, in the garden of your mind, water the seeds of your qualities, such as loving kindness, compassion, and wisdom. Avoid watering your faults. Know the difference between a fault and a quality. Fertilize your qualities. Avoid fertilizing your faults. Pay close attention to your mind so you can see clearly your faults and qualities and distinguish between them. Nurture the qualities and fertilize them with the composted manure of your experience. The faults cast shade on and steal nutrients from the qualities. So don't do anything that cause weeds to grow. Work at uprooting them. Use your awareness to get to know your inner critic, the one who is telling you that you are bad or always doing things wrong or always making mistakes. That critic that uses bad, condemning language and punishes and lectures you. Make friends with it, and then understand that this friend is giving you bad advice. It's fake news. You don't have to follow or believe the content. A flower will never grow to its full potential if we walk on it, if we give up nourishing it, if we throw trash on it, and so forth. You have to give up security, the security of staying where you are, because as I said before, a seed never sees the flower. So develop a revulsion for being angry with yourself. And it can get tricky because we can when we start seeing that inner critic more, we can start getting angry at ourselves for getting angry at ourselves. So it's good to be an observer, see what's going on. But the response is one of nourishing yourself, wanting yourself to grow. We have to see our faults before we can work with them. And this is one reason why Buddhists meditate, is that when we have a regular meditation practice, we train ourselves in mindfulness and paying attention to not only what's going on inside, but what's going on outside. And we get to know ourselves much, much better that way. And we see our qualities and we see our faults. So don't let your thoughts and your emotions control you. Use that space between stimulus and response to exercise your freedom. If you go with whatever impulse arise, there is no freedom. You're just responding to habit. And so there's no growth if we continue engaging in the same old habitual behavior. So in these days, anxiety and worry can come up, whether it be whether we are going to be sick or not, whether or not we can worry about our loved ones, especially children, getting sick, or even worry about people dying, about job loss, about having enough money to pay the bills, and so on and so forth. There's an almost infinite number of things that we can worry about. So here's a story, my personal experience about worrying. That for 8 years, I had a job working at Jackson Correctional Institution, which is down by Black River Falls. And it would take me an hour and 45 minutes from the time I left home to the time that I'd walk in the door. And there is only one door to the prison. You can't go in the back door. And the warden had an office with a window that looked right out on the parking lot that I had to park in. And it was not, it was, I don't know if the word would be common, but sometimes he would be in his window and see me as I walked in, and he would wave to me. Well, sometimes I would leave from home at a time that I knew I would not be there at the time that I was supposed to be at work. And if I wanted to, I could, the whole time for an hour and 45 minutes, I have all kinds of thoughts worrying about what would happen if I'm late, or when I'm late, what will the warden do? What will happen to me? And all kinds of ramifications of that. Or when I realized that I was having those kinds of thoughts, I could let go of them. And because the point is that you can only be late once. I could only be late once. I could be late hundreds of times, or I could be late once. And if you realize that, it becomes a little easier to let go of the anxiety and worry. So this helps us deal with anxiety. And if we can work with anxiety in these times, when things settle down, it'll be even easier to work with anxiety and worry and fear. The point is that our mind, there's a parallel between our mind and our muscles, that the way we strengthen our muscles is by using them, by exercising and so forth. And the way we strengthen our mind to work with anxiety and so forth is to do it when it's really hard to do it. That's when you gain the most. The harder it is to do, when you do it, you gain much more than when it's easy. So actually, these are excellent times for us to work with our minds and work with the anxiety and worry that can arise in these times. And here is a quote that comes from a man named Shante Deva. He was from India. And I'm going to say this came probably around the 7th or 8th century, but I'm not positive. And he said, if you can do something about it, why worry? If you can't do anything about it, why worry? So instead of worrying, do something about it. And if you can't do anything about it, then what's the point of worrying? It's worthless. You're just wasting your time and creating a lot of stress and uh, so forth for yourself. Now, it's fine to have plans, and it's fine to have backup plans. You know, if plan A doesn't work, then go to plan B. There's nothing wrong with that. Plans can be helpful. On the other hand, it's important that this is my definition of a plan. A plan is a well thought out fantasy. And so when plan A falls apart, no big deal. It was just a fantasy to begin with. It was a storyline. But the plans can help us see different ways of working with whatever difficulties we are going to be experiencing. And no matter what we're doing, there's going to be difficulties. It's very, very rare when what we're doing just seems to go like, what would I say, downhill on a sled. So now here is a poem that I like, and this is about thought, and it's about past and future. So the title is Thought. I'm thinking thoughts of long ago. I'm thinking tomorrow, what may be so. I forget I'm thinking. It's not thought, it's real. I forget that what I think determines how I feel. I'm missing life before my eyes. I'm missing beauty in favor of lies. What I see is me. I thought it was you. The observed exists only in the eye of the observer's view. The pot calls the kettle black because only blackness sees black. I remember I'm only thinking, I laugh, and life is beautiful. So this goes back to, again, mindfulness, paying attention to what's going on in our mind and being able to let go of it in most cases, or work with it skillfully. And if you'll notice that all day long, your mind keeps coming back to the same old storyline over and over and over again. You've been thinking about it maybe since after breakfast. And if you really look at it, it gets to be like a soap opera. And not only is it like a soap opera, it's like reruns of a soap opera. You just went through this soap opera 30 minutes ago. When you realize that, there's a very simple solution. It's the same thing you do with your computer when it locks up. You reboot. And the way you reboot is just stop. Just stop. Let go of it. You could try thinking something else. If you are experienced at meditating, you could just try meditating for a short while. Try following the breath. Laugh at yourself for spending so much emotional energy and time believing in this show. Maybe 3 minutes later, after you let go, it comes up again, let go again. Don't take the soap opera seriously. Here is a fortune that I got in a Chinese fortune cookie once. And it is, to see your drama is to be liberated from it. So see it as drama. And then you realize that's all that it is. And I got that poem from a book that Lynn Piffner loaned me way back in 1986. And it's in that bibliography I put over there in the chat box. It's the one, understanding, limiting stress and dissatisfaction in life and relationships. And this is on the second to the last page, which kind of, you might say, sums up the book. Quote, love is the ultimate reality. Ego is the ultimate illusion. Ego is the need to prove self-importance. So now we're back to love. The Buddha described love as wanting everyone to be happy. And in order to really understand love, we need to have the wisdom to distinguish between what causes temporary happiness and later what happiness turns into pain or causes pain in the future. So this is where wisdom comes in. Needless to say, when we are motivated to do things that benefit other people, when we are motivated to do things that, or avoid doing things that harm ourselves and harm other people, this will cause lasting happiness in ourselves and others. And because of interdependence, we are all interrelated, that if you cause happiness in other people, you will be happy yourself. There was a scientific study that was done just a few years ago. And I heard it from Richard Davidson, who has a center for the study of healthy minds down in Madison at the University of Wisconsin. And he said they had two groups. One group they gave $100 to and told them you have to go out and spend this on yourself. And they gave them a happiness test before, and when they came back after spending it. The other group, they did the same, give them a happiness test before and after, gave them $100. But the instructions, you have to spend this $100 on other people. And the group that gave it to other people tested to be happier than the people that spent it on themselves. So really, I've talked here for 40 minutes, or I guess 35 minutes. I thought we would go for 1 hour and 15 minutes, which is what we did in prayer. We're going to do in Prairie Farm. And so maybe this is a good time to open it up to a Q&A. I could say more, but let's do some Q&A at this point. And there, I unmuted everybody.
Do you want the questions or conversations to be typed?
No, just ask them. And if other people start making a lot of noise, we'll just mute them while you're talking and I'm talking. So go ahead, ask the question.
If you were to consider that the choice making between the stimulus and the response, the choice making pause as a muscle, that if you were to remain present when a situation occurred that you needed to have some kind of a response to, and you could take that 2 seconds or 3 seconds to pause before you respond, would you not develop more of a proper response during times of crisis? It would be automatic if you lived where you paused every time you had to make a choice and went, what is it I want to do?
Yeah, it's sometimes, maybe most times we don't have that much time to make the choice, but there are times definitely when we can think about it all day long or all week long. It's really important decisions that don't have to be made right away. I like to mull over, and the longer I mull over it, the more possibilities of the way to make a decision, which direction to go in. But that pause gives us a chance to let our inner wisdom arise, rather than just, you might say, a gut reaction.
Reacting, yeah.
Yeah. And it's a continuum. It's not like either you're here or you're there. It's a continuum.
Oh, right. Being in control of the reaction seems like something to strive for, like building muscle.
Yeah, and part of it comes from just going within, looking at yourself. An example that I like to use comes from The Wizard of Oz. And there is this scene in the movie, and you can go to YouTube and see it, where you have Dorothy and her friends going to the wizard's castle, and they all want something. Cowardly Lion wants a heart, the scarecrow, or wants courage, the scarecrow wants a heart, and so forth. And Dorothy wants to get back to Kansas. And so they go in, and they're in the corner of the castle, and it's a stone castle. There are these flames shooting up, huge flames shooting up, roaring up. And then you have the sound of thunder booming. And then you have this booming voice going, "I am the wizard." And everybody is shaking, except for Toto, the dog. And so Toto goes over to this curtain, pulls the curtain back, and there is this gray-haired old man pulling levers, speaking into a 1939 microphone. And he looks at Dorothy, and Dorothy looks at him, and he says in the microphone, "Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain." And the moral here is, pay attention to the person inside that's behind your curtain. Get to know that person, that inner critic. And the more you know it, the more you realize that I don't have to listen to that person. I can listen to it. I can, might say, be friends with it, but it's giving bad advice. I don't have to follow it.
I agree, yeah. I think recognizing it for what it is 9/10 of the way home.
Exactly. Get to know it and recognize it, and then realize, yeah, you're 9/10 of the way there. Mm-hmm. And again, this is why Buddhists meditate. Right, Terry?
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask you to just talk a little bit more about meditation and just sort of that value of being quiet and observing.
Yeah, this same, it was Richard Davidson. He said this in the same talk, that they found that if they put a man in a room, and he's got a little button, and if he pushes the button, it gives himself a mild shock. And they tell them, just be still for 15 minutes. That many men have to push the button because they can't be still for 15 minutes.
Yeah. It's very hard to just sit and not, it's like you're doing nothing, but you're not doing nothing.
Yes, yeah, it's work to do nothing.
Work to do nothing, yeah, and to just sit with your thoughts and your sensations and feelings. And
yeah, so what meditation is, it's a technique of building mental stability. Mm-hmm. And the most common one in Buddhism, and let's go back a step here. There are all kinds of different meditation techniques throughout the world and different cultures, and people are coming up with new ones all the time. I bet if you went to YouTube and entered meditation, you would have music meditation, you have singing bells meditation, and on and on and on and on and on. But what this is we focus on the breath. And the idea is you just follow the breath going in and going out. And you don't get conceptual about it. You just experience it. And then whenever your mind wanders, like a thought enters, when you realize that you are not following the breath, you come back to the breath. And there are lots of minor variations of this technique within Buddhism, but that's kind of it in a nutshell. And so you train your mind to not be carried away by your thoughts. And as your mind develops that ability more and more, you start seeing that space between stimulus and response. An example that I heard many, many, many years ago when I was first starting out was it's like you're in your car and there's a train crossing here. And so you're in your car and the train is going by. And the cars are your thoughts. And so at first it's just a blur. But then the train slows down and you start seeing space between the cars. And so it's a bit like that. And it doesn't mean, again, it's a moment-to-moment thing. One moment you might see some space between the thoughts, and the next 30 minutes is just a blur. That's the way it is, and you get used to it, and you do it.
Yeah. And you know, one of the things that I was just listening to one of the teachers of Vipassana has a talk for old students, and he really just talked about, you know, there's not really good meditation and bad meditation. There's just meditation, and that, you know, sometimes your mind is just, you know, the whole time you're meditating, whether it's 15 minutes or 10 minutes or an hour or whatever, you might just get to your breath a couple times.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
here's a very respected teacher whose headquarters are in Minneapolis, of all places, world headquarters. And I've seen him do this in more than one of his programs. So we've meditated for 15 minutes. Now he wants a little discussion, and he'll say, how many people had just a few thoughts? Let's show of hands, you know, lots of hands. And then he said, oh, good. Now, how many people had, and I said few thoughts, right? The first, yeah. So then he'll say the opposite. How many people had many, 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 many thoughts? Oh, very, very good. Both groups were aware of whether they were thinking or not. You see, so the goal isn't to slow down the mind and not have thoughts. It's to be aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, any other questions or discussion?
I was going to ask about, and I think that's a really good segue in what I was thinking about was where meditation intersects with talk therapy. And, you know, like in counseling, there's a lot of rehashing old things, you know, our childhoods, whatever pains we've had. And so instead of ignoring them, you're bringing them to the surface and you're dealing with them with company. And for a long time, I've been trying to figure out, like, how does that work with meditation, where you're trying to not have thoughts? But what you were just saying is, no, you can have thoughts. You just have to notice those thoughts and be aware of them. So I think, you know, that's part of it. But I'm wondering if you have anything else about that.
Yeah, well, here, I'll tell you a little bit about my story. That my mother was mentally ill, and she was paranoid, and she would go become hysterical really quickly. And even at a very early age, I remember having nightmares. I stuttered, and I did go to a summer speech camp after the 6th grade, which cured my stuttering. But I had nightmares. The last nightmare I had at home, I was 20 years old. I was home for college, and I had the nightmare was that I was being held prisoner. I was in my bedroom, and so anyway, and that at any moment guards were going to come through the door and take me out and shoot me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to get away. So I went over to my bedroom window, broke the glass out with my bare hands, and jumped through it head first to get the hell out of there. And even when I hit the ground, I still kept running because, you know, it was that real, that intense being home. I would get beaten regularly. I remember mom telling, you know, when I was 15 years old, red-faced, raging with a leather belt, beating me up, saying, "I'm doing this because I love you." That was the love I got. When I was 14, I tried to commit suicide. When I was 16, when I finally resisted, I just wouldn't let Dad grab me. I'd gone out for high school wrestling. There was no way Dad was going to grab me. I didn't hurt him, but I just let him know that he wasn't going to grab me. And what would they do? They put me in a psychiatric ward for 5 days. And I stayed an extra day because it was better than being at home. When I was 17, I stole a car, went about 1,500 miles with Dad's credit card before the police stopped me. This was my childhood. And because of meditation and the Buddhist teachings, this is where I first came up with the idea of the manure of your experience. When I ran, that was a Chogyam Trungpa phrase. And it was like, oh yeah, I know about manure. And it's allowed me to transform it. And it went from being mad, being angry, wanting to hurt her. Literally, when I was 16 and 17, I would fantasize about how I was going to kill her and then have to commit suicide. Does this sound familiar? I can really relate to this when you read this in the newspaper. But I didn't, fortunately. So gradually the anger toned down, but I had all kinds of patterns that all fit together that was holding me prisoner. And then I became extremely depressed when Richard Kreiber was killed in 1985. And so I went to a therapist, and but I did something that I highly recommend, and that is I started reading. Lynn Piffner gave me this book that I quoted from. And in my what I did is, instead of being totally depressed, I did have enough ambition to look and to read and so forth. And what I learned about depression, first of all, which I really like, one of the books I read at that time was F. Scott Peck's Road Less Traveled. And he said, depression is your mind telling you that you can't stay where you are. That where you are is not working. But anyway, it led in about 1.5 years for me to seek meditation. And through that, and then attending teachings, I realized that depression had 2 aspects to it. One was anger towards yourself, and the other was laziness. And so I started investigating that. And I started doing more time trying to learn to, I did, you know, in a way, I wasn't consciously doing this, but just practicing meditation as a way to love yourself. Letting go of your thoughts when they come up is a way to love yourself, the thoughts of anger. When the memories come up of getting beaten, the memories of the anger and so on and so forth come up, just let go of it rather than dwell on it, and so forth. And gradually, little by little, I started seeing this more and more and more, the patterns, and was able to weaken the patterns. And it was a collection of different patterns. It wasn't that it was a whole. And when you start seeing it, the parts are still there, but they quit acting as a unified whole. This is what I found. And then gradually, as my anger towards mom went down, and anger towards dad, because he was a participant. He didn't beat me, but he was just fine with mom doing that. I didn't go home for 29 years. They came and followed me, visited me out there because I was mom's favorite. So then I did a 3-year retreat, Tibetan Buddhist retreat out in upstate New York. And I came back, and that Christmas, I went home for the first time in 29 years.
Wow.
And it was hard. I didn't stay too many days, but I could handle it. And I started seeing mom a little differently. She was totally freaked out by me being a Buddhist. She didn't want to know anything about it other than don't do it. Being a Buddhist monk really freaked her out. But it gets better. So then about 2002, I was invited down to Carlton in Northfield, Minnesota to do a chapel service there, a Buddhist chapel service. And mom and dad had gone to St. Olaf in the late 30s. And at that time, Carlton was a party school of the wealthy. And mom thought that as a result of that, she had a lot of, what would I say? She really liked Carlton. And she happened to be at Northfield at St. Olaf for some kind of an alumni thing. They were donors, and so they got invited there a lot. And so she said, "Oh, can we go and see?" And I said, "Of course. We're not gonna participate." So they sat in the back, and I did my Lama Yeshe, leading a chapel service. And when it was all over, I went up to her, and she was all excited, and she said, "Oh, you're a minister. I always wanted you to be a minister." She wanted me to be a Lutheran minister, but this was all right. And from there, things got better and better. And then she developed Alzheimer's in her late 80s. She lived to 96. And as she developed Alzheimer's, that fear of hers, the paranoia of hers, the mental illness disappeared. That part of her brain got destroyed. Mm-hmm. And let's go back a bit, because there's another part of the puzzle that I need to touch on, because I think it's a wonderful story. When I was working in the prison as a prison chaplain, which was from 2003 to 2011, I realized that some of these prisoners behaved very much like mom. And they had been sexually assaulted as kids. And I came to the conclusion, I even talked it over with a social worker about mom's behavior. And she agreed with me that she was probably sexually assaulted by somebody as a child. And the perpetrator lived outside the home, that it wasn't somebody inside the home. That was how specific this social worker could get with the behavior of mom. And also to give you an idea about mentally ill, when she was in her late 80s, I was home at Christmas time, and in front of Dad, she told me that back in the early 70s, they implanted a camera up my rectum and have been watching me ever since. You don't have to be a PhD in psychiatry to make this diagnosis. But anyway, as the Alzheimer's set in, fear and anxiety melted away, and she had a 180 personality change, and she became this kind, loving grandmother. She was afraid of any minorities. My wife, I don't think any of you knew me way back when I was married, She was Japanese American from Hawaii, and mom and dad tried to pay me to not get married. And now here we are at this nursing home in Cottage Grove. And I had told, they were in Colorado, I said, come up and live by me when you move into a home. That's how far I had transitioned in this relationship. My brother and my sister really didn't want to handle this. And so they did. And so I went up there one Christmas day with my brother, and my sister flew in, and we were in their room in the Alzheimer's unit, and the head nurse, one of the head nurses came in who was from Africa. And ordinarily this would have set mom off. And so and this was mom's common response at this time of her life. Oh, honey, you're so sweet. Come over here and let me kiss you. And the nurse did, and she gave her a kiss and hugged her and everything. And then she had the nurse sit down next to her. And my sister and I are looking at us like, what planet have we come to here? But that was the way she went out of the world, happier than I'd ever seen her in life. Anyway, and since then, I have thought many times, and I thought this before, but instead of thinking about her, I'm so angry at, I think about what she has done for me that I have benefited from. And it's a long list. Like, I really like this body of mine. I'm really attached to it. So all you mothers out there. So anyway, there's a long story about if you can see what's going on inside of you clearly, it doesn't control you anymore. But you have to not be afraid of it. There was a person that I was going to get into, but I didn't. I ran out of time. And it is Pema Chodron here. She has 2 books, The Places That Scare You and When Things Fall Apart. And they're excellent books here. I'll read you a couple of quotes that I have, if I can find them. Maybe I can't find them. Yeah, here we go. We think that the point is to pass the test or overcome the problem. But the truth is that things don't really get solved. They come together and they fall apart. Then they come together again and they fall apart. It's just like that. The healing comes from letting there be room for all of this to happen, room to grieve, room for relief, and for misery, for joy. And then the other quote of hers that I wanted to give is this: the most fundamental aggression to ourselves, the most fundamental harm we can do to ourselves is to remain ignorant by not having the courage and the respect to look at ourselves honestly and gently. So those are a couple of quotes of hers, and I recommend those books. She has been on Oprah Winfrey's show multiple times. She has a much wider audience than Buddhists. That was a good question, Jessica. I'm glad you asked that.
Thanks.
I didn't give you too much of an answer, did I?
Oh, yeah, it was just right. It was perfect.
Okay, good.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's really my strength. It is really my strength. And I'll share this with you too, that I had no trust for authority by the time I became an adult. And then when I was 24, 1969, I went down to Chicago to a wedding with my wife, my 2-year-old son. And I got arrested by the police for growing marijuana. I was taking out the garbage at the friend's house that I was staying with, and they just picked up weeds that were around the trash cans. and threw them in their trunk and said I was harvesting marijuana and it was in my possession.
Wow.
And I had a very bad attitude towards police before that happened. But then in 2003, right after I got the job working in the prison, which this bad attitude would have been a real obstacle at least, I attended a retreat that Thich Nhat Hanh led in Green Lake, Wisconsin for people in criminal justice. And it really helped me, again, work with a lot of issues that I had about authority and police. So there's a reason why I'm a Lama, and that is that I found it extremely beneficial and I want to pass what I've learned on to other people.
Mhm.
It's too good to keep to myself.
Right.
Well, it's nice. I'm pleased that you guys have your cameras on so I can see your faces, that I'm not just talking to, what would I say, the universe. And Mike and Patty, you look pretty comfortable.
We are comfortable.
Well, I'll tell you what, when this is all over with and you're not on camera, give each other a hug for me.
Certainly not now.
Yeah,
Do we have time for another question?
of course.
Yeah, so I've heard a couple things around thoughts, and a couple times you talked about, just letting them go.
Yeah.
And then I think I heard you say one other time, or work with them skillfully. And I wondered if you'd say a little bit about what you mean by work with them skillfully.
Yeah, well, when you meditate or when you go through your daily life, certain thoughts are going to keep coming up over and over and over again. And so the skillfully working with them means let's look into this more deeply. Why is it that this keeps coming up? Why is it that this irritates me? What's going on? Rather than just, what would I say, trying to get away from it or just letting it go. That when you're meditating, that's not the time. But when you're not meditating, that's a time to, sit down, get a little quiet and let's look into this. And as Jessica mentioned, a lot of times it goes back to childhood issues. Or whatever. We have we are emotional beings. We are not logical. All you have to do is watch TV ads. How many of the TV ads sell things out of logic? We are emotional beings. And so it's good to look at our emotions and what's causing these emotional responses. So that's where, as I said, when you're going over and over and over things during the day, and it's the same thing, then, well, what's going on here? Why am I obsessed with this? And what the usual response is, well, let's, do something to divert my attention. Let's get on Facebook, or let's go shop, or let's go out and do some yard work, or whatever. Let's, do something else and forget about it. But the wise thing is to look in and start getting to know yourself better. And this is what I like about Buddhism, is that our minds are looked at as being primordially pure. And all the negativity comes later, but the purity is there from the beginning. And so it's well worth the effort to look inside and try to uncover that wisdom that purity and so forth. But there are other ways. You know, this is just what's worked for me, is going through Buddhism. And this is why I brought in sources from outside of Buddhism, because that wisdom is in all of us, in all cultures, in all races and so forth. And it's different ways to that it comes out and expresses itself.
So I remember a teaching, I can't tell you who I got it from, which is that as you go through life, sometimes you'll have responded very strongly to a situation, and after the fact you went, oh my gosh, wow, I really reacted strongly to that. But you're aware of it. Maybe previously you weren't aware of it, but after the fact you were aware that you reacted very strongly.
Yeah.
And if you're careful, then as you go on, you can realize as you're reacting to the situation, oh, that's interesting. I'm reacting very strongly to the situation. And eventually you get to this point where you can kind of see these triggers coming. You may not be able to stop it, but you can still, part of your mind is saying, oh yeah, what this person is doing, yeah, I'm going to react strongly. And then eventually you're working backwards in time, where then you can stop and say, oh, that's a trigger. You know, I'm about to react strongly. Maybe I should wait. And that's that, you're talking about the delay between the train cars or whatever, that you just have to work at overtime and be very patient with yourself, you know, to just start to observe it after the fact. That's totally fine. You know, that's even better, right? Et cetera. So you just, you know, you give yourself permission to be okay with it, but that you're observing it, and over time you kind of improve. And we never get past it. We just never get that good at it, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, let me read you a poem.
Better.
It's called Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters. I don't have a clue about where the woman that wrote this was coming from in terms of spiritual traditions, but here it is. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I am in the same place. But it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It's my fault. I immediately get out. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down another street. Is that what you're talking about, Kurt?
That sounds good. Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Yeah, life is a process. You know, it's not solid.
Mhm.
I just wanted to kind of add to what Kurt was saying, that I have an older brother he's very intense, very self-centered and about himself, and he's an angry person. He also does amazing work in his life. But when my mother was dying, you know, I just tried to avoid him like crazy, but when my mother was dying, I couldn't avoid him. And he would get really strong-headed about things, and suddenly I didn't have the energy to react to him or something, and I just decided to say, you know, I love you, and I know you feel really strongly about this, but this is not how we're going to do it, because this is what Mom wanted, and I love you, and this is going to be the end of the conversation. And then I'd say goodbye to him if we were on the phone, or if we were in person, you know, he would just kind of back off. But it was amazing how it shifted things.
Yeah.
Shifted my response. He started to apologize.
Really?
Tell me he loves me. And
Yeah.
now we have a different relationship. I mean, it's still, this stuff comes up, but But I just remember to say I love him. And it
It
just,
shows you about skillful means, you know, that
Yeah.
changed the whole thing. Yeah.
yeah.
I should remember that with my brother.
Yeah,
It sounds like your brother.
oh yeah, he's kind of narcissistic, I guess I would say. Sometimes he's a little bit like, yeah, somebody in the White House, but
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is what I say at Christmas time, that really families are sometimes really the best place to learn how to be tolerant and patient and loving, because they can be so difficult.
yeah.
Yeah, here's a story about my brother, and this was when one of these Christmas times, that would be the only time you would come, would be at Christmas time to see the folks. And very intelligent, very narrow-minded and opinionated. And so he just went into a rant about the evils of Islam. And, you know, so I tried to say something, and this was not a discussion that we were having. This was a lecture. So I grabbed my laptop. This was at the nursing home. And I said, I'm going to check my email. And I went out and I was gone for 45 minutes. And then I came back and he was still ranting, but he quickly then let go of that. So it wasn't quite as nice as saying I love you, but I was saying that I'm not going to participate in this. It's
Yeah,
not something I'm going to participate in.
yeah. Yeah, and that's basically, I just added the I love you and I'm not going to do this with you,
Yeah,
basically.
I should have said that too. I'm checking my email, but by the way, I love you.
Yeah, yeah, and it is interesting. It softened him up in many ways, and we're actually able to be in a conversation for a while, you know,
Yeah.
far more than we used to be. So
Well, that's good.
yeah, and I do love him.
Yeah, well, I have no doubt. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think I knew that before.
Well, thank you for that comment. That was great.
Well, thank you.
Anything else? Any other comments? Well, I think I've covered things that I wanted to cover. And I guess I will end by saying that I hope that all of you find this beneficial in one way or another. Yeah. And please try to keep your minds calm during all of this. And I'm looking forward to more of these talks that George will sponsor through the Green Skills program.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, George.
Yeah, I had a number of slides, and I'm going to put one of these up here at the end. Actually, probably two of them, because I just forgot about it when we got started. So hold on for just a second here.
Sure.
Yeah.
While George is doing that, I just want to say how wonderful it was to see all of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Really nice.
I think this Zoom is, I don't know, I really appreciate it during this time of, you know, being indoors.
Yep.
Be able to see people's faces, it's really nice.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
So
Very
this
nice.
is sponsored by the Hay River Transit. And thank you, Jess, for making it. And then John supplied this picture.
You like that, Mike?
I
Very
love
nice.
that.
Let's get to work.
In the background there is his barn, which I got a tour of a number of years ago, and he has a beautiful woodworking shop in there, besides it looking nice on the outside.
Yeah, Lee Theron helped do the restoration. So there's a plug for Lee.
Yeah, he's good.
Okay, so I just wanted to get those in at the end. So,
I like the green background on that green tractor. That really is a very good choice of green.
Nice.
which, if anybody knows me, that was pure happenstance, because I don't see colors hardly at all. So
Yeah, yeah, what's the green skills?
Okay.
I guess I'll end with this. It's always good to have some humor.
Absolutely.
So maybe I'll end with a joke. And that was that a few years ago, I was up at Farm and Fleet in Rice Lake. And there was one man in front of me that was paying for a bag, a 25 bag pound of bird seed. And now I could have just stood there and waited, but I thought I'd start a conversation. And I said that your birds are going to be happy when you get home. And he said, yeah, they get irritated when there's no seed in the feeder. And so I said, well, yeah, at my place, if there's no seed in the bird feeder, the birds turn towards the house and go, cheep, cheep, cheep. And he buckled over in laughter, and the clerk buckled over in laughter. And when she finally did finish the transaction, then she looked at her next customer, and it was me, and she buckled over a second time. And I thought, yes, I spread a little bit of joy.
Very good.
That's good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was encouraging. The whole thing was very encouraging.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Spread the love.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Terry said.
Thank you all. It's nice to
Thank
be with you.
Good to see
Yeah.
you.
Thank you too, George.
Thank you, George.
Okay, good
Thank you.
night, everybody.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.